The way in which we will be preparing for preserving peace and eventually fighting wars in the future cannot be done with the instruments of the past. And if you look to the way in which many national establishments in NATO and the one conducting one of the most comprehensive overviews and overhauls of their national strategy, let's say national strategic overlook is the UK. They are preparing for the next few months, I believe, what they call the integrated review. And we had a glimpse, of course, at what our British colleagues are doing. And it's quite interesting to see the shift between, let's say, more traditional investment in defense to something that is far more creative on cyber, on hybrid, on new technologies, on space. So this is something that will probably continue with many other allies. So I will put this first dimension of complexity. The second thing is that on new technologies, including in defense and security-related applications of technology, we are in many fields in a totally unregulated space. So if we have some form of architecture for traditional arms control, of course, still under transformation. We've seen the discussions between the US and Russia, also the attempts from the US to convince China to join this conversation about let's say, the architecture of arms control globally. France and the UK, the two European nuclear powers, are also trying to get into that conversation. But leaving aside something that we know how to do, when it comes to new technologies, we are basically in terra incognita. And this is where we'll have to lead the way as NATO, or as a democratic West, if you want, to lead the way in creating the global framework for the utilization of such technologies. There'll be lots of ethical questions. There'll be lots of moral questions. There will be lots of political questions. There'll be lots of social and economic questions. So I would just hint to a domain where new technologies will also come very, very actively in collision or in concussion with the way in which we regulate and we establish global norms. Or if the trend that we see today would continue, we see probably a segregation of the democratic world on the one side and the autocratic world on the other side. We'll see, things are evolving. Thirdly, there is also an issue on resilience, as NATO also has a body of expertise on resilience, which is unique, I would say, in the Western institutional world. Because again, our leaders were, giving us the marching orders, also, I think, at the Warsaw Summit 2016, to establish what we call in our jargon, the baseline requirements for resilience. There are 7 for the time being, on civil military, on infrastructures, on energy, on transport, on all these kind of things. We've just updated our resilience requirements at the previous Defense Ministerial of NATO, and we'll be again upgrading them at the upcoming Defense Ministerial meeting that will take place in the second part of October here. And I personally believe that a very robust resilience package would also be on the table of our leaders at the next summit in 2021. I believe this will be one of the most important deliverables, as we say, for this summit. And of course, we are looking also to what the EU is doing on this side. I just received here at NATO headquarters, I think last week, I think also Francesco Talò, our dear friend, the Italian ambassador to NATO, I've seen him in a picture there, in a screen earlier. We also met him. And also that was very interesting to find out that on 5G, our competitors, if we want to really continue to compete and also be the ones who are, let's say, retaining not only our global supremacy, but also retaining our way of life, our democratic systems, our values, we have to come together, because nobody, nor Europe, strategic and autonomous, that's fine. Everybody is asking for Europe to do more on defense, nor America alone. They cannot do this because, again, there's a formidable competitor, China, plus the combinations of other non-democratic nations that can coalesce around China. Russia continues to be a very complicated player. I agree that they are not a formidable economic player, but they continue to be, a big spoiler, and they can create trouble. And we have to make sure that all these things are taken into account. So I think, what can we bring as a sort of a, you know, uh, in long marriages, there is, something which I think is a tactical invention from us who believe in the sanctity of contracts. That's why when you are 50 years of marriage, you do some platinum thing, and you renew the vows. You recommit to each other. You give new dynamism and fresh ideas to an enduring relationship. And we have to find, this kind of commonality, which is easy to be described in terms of values and strategic need to be together in the transatlantic world, but also in practical terms, sometimes it's not that easy. I mentioned 5G earlier. I also sense something, and I think also here, Aspen Italia could continue the good work. Aspen US and others could do this work. Aspen Romania, that I founded 15 years ago, could do something. I feel that in terms of big tech, because a portion of the conversation around the economic strategic autonomy of Europe comes also from the reality that Europe doesn't have big tech giants. Of course, we have, which is very good, in Sweden and Finland, two very important players on 5G. But I believe that if the US and Europe are coming to some form of practical understanding on 5G, I think this could be the beginning of a backbone on a conversation how to approach the technological revolution together. For the first time, we are seeing the US Congress and US public opinion becoming concerned about the risk of too much power into these operations. Also in European Union, European Parliament, our national parliaments, we see the beginning of some form. So why not believe and think after the American elections that we could revisit in a smart way, not the old and already defunct transatlantic, partnership, a sort of a big free trade area between the two sides of the Atlantic. Probably it's not the time, and it was probably too ambitious at that time. But probably building on some blocks, of course, on security, but of course on technologies, of course on innovation, of course on resilience, and of course on our need to compete with an adversary that is basically formidable.